Arjun Malhotra vanished without warning, and his daughter Riya Malhotra was the one who went to the police, her voice steady as she reported her father missing from their quiet suburban home. For months, Riya appeared to be the only person still searching for answers, reminding officers that Arjun would never abandon his life. Posters faded, the case went cold, and the town moved on, believing Arjun was gone forever. But while police searched roads and forests, Arjun was still alive, trapped beneath the same house everyone thought was empty, surviving in silence while the person leading the search had a secret that would later shock an entire nation. The story began on a quiet winter morning when a middle-aged man disappeared from his modest home on the edge of a peaceful town. He was known as a private but dependable person who followed the same routine every day. He woke up early, took short walks, and rarely missed a day of work. When he failed to appear at his job and did not answer calls, people assumed he was sick or resting. By the third day, concerns started to grow. His house was locked from the outside, his car remained parked in the driveway, and nothing inside appeared disturbed. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. His adult daughter contacted the police and officially reported him missing. She explained that her father had no reason to leave suddenly and had never shown signs of wanting to disappear. Officers took the report seriously and began initial searches around the neighborhood. They checked nearby streets, bus stops, hospitals, and shelters. His phone showed no recent activity, and his bank account remained untouched. There are no signs of a struggle, no notes, and no witnesses who had seen him leave. As days passed, the town slowly became aware of the disappearance. Neighbors whispered theories, ranging from sudden breakdown to a secret life no one knew about. Some believed he had chosen to walk away from everything, while others feared something far worse had happened. Winter storms came and went, covering the streets in silence, while the mystery deepened. Posters were placed on shop windows, and police patrols continued their search, but every effort led to the same result: nothing. What no one realized at the time was that the truth was far closer than anyone imagined. While the town searched roads and forests, the answer was hidden beneath a familiar roof, waiting in darkness, unheard and unseen. Investigators continued working the case with careful attention during the weeks that followed. They examined the missing man's personal history in detail, searching for any sign that he might have planned to disappear. His financial records showed no unusual withdrawals, no secret accounts, and no recent purchases that suggested travel. His passport was still inside the house, untouched. Friends and coworkers were questioned, and all described him as predictable and cautious, someone who valued stability above everything else. There were no arguments, no threats, and no known enemies connected to his life. The police also focused on his family connections, especially his daughter. She provided photos, personal details, and timelines to assist the investigation. She appeared distressed and repeatedly asked for updates, pressing officers to keep searching. To those involved in the case, her concern seemed natural. She spoke about her father's health, his habits, and how unusual it was for him to be silent for so long. Her cooperation helped establish a clear picture of the days before his disappearance, yet nothing in her statements raised immediate suspicion. Despite the effort, the investigation slowly lost momentum. Without physical evidence or credible leads, searches were reduced. The case was discussed during meetings, but often pushed aside by newer emergencies. Eventually, authorities began to consider the possibility that the man had chosen to leave on his own. Such cases were rare for someone of his personality, but not impossible. With limited resources and no proof of a crime, the file was gradually moved out of active status. As time passed, hope faded. Posters were removed, and conversations about the missing man became less frequent. Life in the town returned to its usual rhythm. Behind closed doors, the daughter continued living in the same house, maintaining the image of an abandoned home. What investigators did not know was that their assumption. Several months after the case was set aside, small and unsettling details began to surface. A neighbor mentioned that on certain nights, faint thudding sounds could be heard coming from the missing man's house. At first, it was dismissed as pipes shifting in the cold or animals moving through the walls. Another resident claimed to have seen a dim light flicker briefly from a basement window, even though the house was believed to be empty. These observations seemed minor and uncertain, and no one felt confident enough to push the matter further. The house itself stood unchanged, giving the clear impression of abandonment. Dust coated the windows, mail piled up at the front door, and the yard grew wild with weeds. From the outside, nothing suggested activity. Still, the strange reports continued. A delivery driver noticed the basement vent was warm during the winter, an unusual detail for a house with no occupants. A utility worker later observed that water usage at the property had not stopped completely, though it remained low enough to avoid raising alarms. These fragments of information existed separately, never fully connected. Each person assumed there was a simple explanation and chose not to interfere. In a town where people valued privacy, questioning what happened behind closed doors felt uncomfortable. The daughter was occasionally seen entering the house late at night and leaving early in the morning, reinforcing the belief that she was only checking on her father's belongings or preparing the home for sale. Meanwhile, beneath the floorboards, time moved differently. The hidden space in the basement remained sealed, carefully concealed from casual inspection. The man's existence faded from public memory, replaced by theories and forgotten conversations. What appeared to be an empty house was quietly holding a living secret, protected by silence, routine, and the unwillingness of others to look deeper. The turning point came during a routine review of inactive cases when an officer noticed a pattern that had been overlooked. Utility records showed irregular but consistent usage at the supposedly vacant house. Combined with earlier neighborhood reports that had never been fully followed up, the details stood out. Authorities decided a welfare check was justified, even months after the disappearance. What began as a procedural visit would soon unravel the entire mystery. When officers arrived at the property, the exterior still suggested abandonment. The front door was locked, windows were covered in dust, and the silence felt complete. Inside, however, there were signs of recent presence. The air was stale, but not untouched. In the kitchen, food packaging appeared newer than expected. As they moved deeper into the house, they noticed the basement door was secured with an unfamiliar locking mechanism, far stronger than what would normally be used inside a family home. The basement steps were narrow and steep, leading into a space colder and darker than the rest of the house. Moisture clung to the walls, and the smell was heavy, unnatural. At the bottom, officers found a reinforced inner door hidden behind storage shelves. The structure appeared intentionally concealed, designed to blend into the basement's layout. Fresh marks around the hinges suggested frequent use. When the door was forced open, the discovery was immediate and horrifying. The missing man was found alive, barely recognizable from photos taken months earlier. His body was frail, his movement limited, and his surroundings showed clear signs of long-term confinement. The room had no windows, only a small opening used to pass minimal supplies. The realization struck hard. This was not a disappearance, but an imprisonment carried out in complete secrecy. The house that once seemed empty was suddenly transformed into a crime scene, and the case was no longer about finding a missing person. Emergency services were called immediately, and the man was carefully removed from the basement. His condition revealed the true extent of what he had endured. He was severely underweight, dehydrated, and unable to stand without support. Medical staff noted signs of prolonged isolation, including confusion, extreme weakness, and sensitivity to light. Every movement caused visible pain, showing that his body had been pushed far beyond normal limits. The reality that he had survived for months in such conditions left even professionals shaken. At the hospital, doctors worked to stabilize him slowly, knowing that sudden changes could be dangerous. His recovery required careful monitoring, controlled nutrition, and constant care. Tests confirmed that he had been deliberately deprived of basic needs, but kept alive just enough to prevent death. This detail immediately changed the direction of the investigation. The confinement was not accidental or impulsive. It was planned, sustained, and controlled. Meanwhile, police secured the house and began a full forensic examination. The basement room revealed disturbing evidence of long-term captivity. The walls were soundproofed with makeshift materials, and the door was reinforced to prevent escape. Items found inside showed how carefully his movements had been restricted. The small opening used to deliver food explained how his captor avoided entering the room frequently, reducing the risk of detection. As news of the discovery spread, the town reacted with shock and disbelief. The idea that a man could be imprisoned beneath a familiar home while daily life continued above felt impossible. Investigators faced growing pressure to identify who was responsible. With no signs of forced entry and no evidence of outside involvement, attention naturally turned inward toward those who had access to the house. The missing person case was officially reclassified as a criminal confinement investigation. As investigators focused on identifying the person responsible, the evidence pointed in an unexpected direction. There were no signs of a break-in, no fingerprints belonging to strangers, and no surveillance footage showing unknown visitors. Every detail suggested that the person who controlled the basement had full and legal access to the house. This realization narrowed the list of suspects dramatically and forced police to look closely at the man's immediate family. Financial records became a critical part of the investigation. Bank statements revealed that bills, taxes, and property payments had been handled carefully during the months of the disappearance. Documents showed recent changes related to property management and legal authority, changes that could only be made with intimate knowledge of the man's affairs. These transactions had been made quietly, without raising suspicion, and were timed closely with the day he was reported missing. Attention turned to the daughter, whose actions now appeared calculated rather than desperate. Investigators compared her statements with newly uncovered evidence and began noticing inconsistencies in timelines and behavior. Phone location data placed her at the house during hours she claimed to be elsewhere. Supplies found in the basement matched purchases made on her account. Each piece of evidence on its own seemed minor, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. Neighbors were re-interviewed and recalled seeing her entering the home regularly, often late at night. What had once been interpreted as grief-driven behavior now appeared purposeful. The careful maintenance of the house, the controlled utility usage, and the illusion of abandonment all pointed to long-term planning. The case took a darker turn as investigators realized the crime was not driven by anger or impulse, but by strategy. The person who had reported the man missing was now the central focus of the investigation and the image of a concerned. With the evidence steadily growing, investigators began reconstructing the full sequence of events. The timeline revealed a plan that had been carefully prepared long before the disappearance was reported. Materials used to reinforce the basement room had been purchased weeks in advance. Soundproofing elements were installed gradually to avoid drawing attention. The design showed an understanding of how to hide activity while keeping the captive alive, suggesting patience and calculated intent rather than sudden violence. The man had been isolated deliberately to remove him from public view without triggering immediate legal consequences. By keeping him alive, his legal status remained unresolved, allowing control over assets and decisions without formally declaring him dead. Investigators determined that the missing person report was a key part of the strategy. It created the appearance of concern while diverting attention away from the house itself. The search efforts focused outward, while the truth remained sealed below. Digital records added further clarity. Internet searches related to property control, guardianship laws, and medical survival under confinement were traced back to a single device. The pattern showed long-term research rather than panic-driven behavior. This information revealed how the captor anticipated potential risks and worked to minimize them. Even the minimal supplies provided were calculated to sustain life without allowing recovery or resistance. As the picture became clearer, the emotional impact of the case deepened. The betrayal involved was not only physical, but psychological. The crime relied on trust, routine, and the assumption that family bonds were safe. Investigators recognized that the success of the confinement depended on social expectations and the reluctance of others to question a familiar narrative. The final chapter of the case unfolded long after the arrest, when the town had time to reflect on what had happened. Court proceedings brought a sense of closure, but they also reopened wounds. Detailed evidence revealed how easily routine and trust had been used as tools to hide a crime. The timeline showed that the truth had been present from the beginning, overlooked because it seemed unthinkable. For many, this realization was more disturbing than the crime itself. The man's recovery became a quiet process, far from public attention. Physical strength returned slowly, but the emotional damage proved harder to heal. Specialists worked with him to rebuild a sense of safety and independence after months of isolation. Simple experiences, such as natural light and open spaces, had to be reintroduced gradually. His survival stood as a testament to endurance, but it also highlighted how fragile human trust can be when exploited. The house was eventually emptied and permanently closed. Neighbors avoided walking past it, treating it as a reminder of something they wished they had questioned sooner. The basement, once hidden and ignored, became the symbol of the entire case. It represented how danger can exist beneath familiar settings, unnoticed because it does not fit expected patterns. The story spread beyond the town, drawing attention from media and true crime audiences. It forced conversations about missing person cases, family control, and the importance of following even small inconsistencies. Authorities reviewed procedures, acknowledging that assumptions had allowed the crime to continue unchecked. In the end, the case left behind more than a criminal record. It left a warning about silence, appearances, and misplaced trust. The man was found alive, but the illusion that had protected his imprisonment was finally buried, reminding everyone that the truth can survive even the darkest confinement, waiting for the moment it is finally seen.